I never get bored of it. I've heard it a few times, but I always hear something different and new each time. I think it makes, for at least most of us here, it makes a lot of intuitive sense. But there's actually a lot of science. And so I kind of did I was called to action last minute, so I just pulled together some of my from other presentations. So I think it's best to kind of do it as a discussion. So please feel free to jump in, because I know we have a lot of experts here as well. So kind of more like a discussion. I always like to start with a little humor. So, because the play element is very important to everything we do, to our cognition. And I think looking at all the maps that Anthony had showed us, what it really is it engages all of our senses. And I think that's why it makes so much intuitive sense to us, and even to children. And it is indeed, I think, universal. And so, so Karen was saying that it's like work of art, right? And it is, because it's like where words stop. A lot of our photos and images, continue. And so, because here is, because cognition is not just in our heads. It is in our body. It is in the kind of even the field, the magnetic field that we create, kind of the energy we send out, because every thought is biochemistry, is electromagnetic. It's within the body, but it also exudes out. So, the author of The Extended Mind, Annie Murphy Paul, said it in this way, and I really like it. And she says, "What we shouldn't do is keep our thoughts inside our heads, inert, unchanged by encounters with the world beyond the skull. So we should extend it out." And I think territory mapping and just mapping and with the graphics and all that just makes a lot of sense. So again, it is engaging all our senses. So that to me, when I first saw Anthony's map, I immediately think, oh, it is multisensory. So I want you to think, like, a lot of times words not only can express all, especially in emergency situations. If you look at these logos, can you imagine like having to explain to someone like in a fraction of a second, like don't go there, stop here, or there's going to be a landslide. So hence the images. So it is quick, simple, direct, universal. Just to give you an example, this is a study done where they showed people, subjects, they told a story. So one group was told a story twice, and one group was told a story and then showed like animation of the story. And then they tested the subjects after the showings, and the results is very clear. The ones that were shown the animation and the images, the retention rate is much higher, and it is at multi-levels. So that's just one example. So it is stored in multi-layers, and it is recorded in our brain on more levels than just the verbal. It is lodged deeper in the brain, meaning that you remember it. So it works on our memory. And so again, this is the visual thinking of mapping. Visual thinking frees our mind to solve problems in a unique and effective ways. So instead of mountains of documents, it is just a few symbolic images can explain a lot. So visual thinking. I think another thing that's very intuitive and makes sense to us, the human condition, is the storytelling part. And I know we had these conversations before where the storytelling is, us by evolution, is how humans learn, is storytelling. So, and of course, territory mapping is all about telling the story of individuals, organization, community. So, storytelling. And of course, we're also using, in the storytelling, we're using metaphors. And so, so it allows you to link. So this is how our brain works, is the way we learn the fastest is linking what's new to what's already there. So that's why even in technology, and I'm in biotech, you can't introduce something too new, so-called market disruptors. Yes, it can be disruptors, but it can't be too much to the extreme. It needs to be something that people can relate to, and so that's why metaphors work, and that's why symbolisms work. So it's something new to something old. It is. So Barbara Oakley out of San Diego, her work is in studying cognition, learning, and education. And so like her, she puts it as like a diffuse mode and focus mode. And that is not just in learning, but even in the way we live and relax. So our brain needs to focus, but we also need to let it relax. And so think of it as like new information is like the pinballs in the pinball machine. So once it gets to the brain, it has to like have a lot of freedom, a lot of room and space to run around and to make those connections. And the more connections, the more space it bounces around in, the more connections it'll make. And that also stimulates our creativity. So again, creativity, memory, thinking, cognition, metacognition is all working together. So that's how our brain works. And I think another reason why mapping makes a lot of sense. And so again, we're talking about just now that study on the story of the rats flipping pancakes, because they also found that when you are learning via images, it's multisensory, and in that it actually also affects your motor skills. So when you're actually picturing images, your neural pathway and the motor pathways and areas in your brain actually lights up. So and just to kind of flip this around, and there's these really meaningful researches where they have bodybuilders build muscle without actually moving weights. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that or have ever heard of that.
Yeah.
Or, yeah, you have. And another one that I always think is fun is learning to shoot for basketball players. So they have like groups where they would actually shoot basketball for like 2 weeks. And then another group that is just visualizing shooting. And then one is just, playing around kind of your neutral group. And the group that actually is doing the visualizing, their score actually went up a point higher than the ones that's just doing this visual shooting. So that is the power of the brain. And again, this is tapping into our visual pathways and multisensory visual. So, and I think another very important part in this is the movement, the visual, all the sensory is the element of play. So when you're creating these maps, you're not just really drawing on your brain is doing a whole lot. And that element of play is definitely, like, when was the last time any of you, show of hands, played with crayons or drew? In the, let's say this past month. Wasn't fair, you guys are in that business. Yeah, so what I'm saying is, when we're kids, we play, and actually kids learn by playing. So, and I always say this, a few of you I know I've chatted with, we talked about how the school system is just so outdated right now, and it's actually killing our kids because we're having them sit down like, an hour on end and giving them top-down lectures. It doesn't work. They need to get up and move, because actually the movement, it stimulates a lot of neurochemical pathways that helps them retain information. So again, mapping introduces that element of play. Another thing is the magic of fingers to pencil to paper and to the brain. There's some magic in that, and there's a whole loads of research on that. I know because some of us were talking about kind of we need hard scientific data for them to convince clients and groups to kind of utilize and use territory mapping. There's a lot of research on this. Suffice it to say that just in the world of journaling, the use of journaling for therapy right now is incredible, and it's almost essential to a lot of programs that I know. So it's that magic of handwriting. So they actually have done a lot of research. So in 2010, for example, there's so much. But for example, 2010, University of Wisconsin found that writing entails using the hand and fingers to form letters, and the sequential finger movements activate multiple regions of the brain associated with processing, remembering, and a lot of studies have also found that kids that actually use pencil to write do better in tests and in performance. So these are just data. There's so much out there. I'm just mentioning very little fraction of it. And again, I think what's very important about territory mapping that's different than all other brain mappings is the psychosocial part. So again, social connection is so important, not just in our life, our happiness, which is the Waldinger research out of Harvard, longitudinal study. The number one factor to happiness is social connection. Not only that, but in health. So the blue zones of the world, they did a lot of studies on this, even the Dunedin project, which is the longest longitudinal study for health and other purposes. But one of that data they found is number one factor to longevity is social connection. So we used to think it was water, nutrition, air. No, it's social connection. So it is going out after lunch, gossiping about this, talking about that, just, hanging out. So, and I think this mapping is the element of sitting around the fire, talking about who you're protecting, what you're growing. I think that induces a lot of that psychosocial factor. So visual work, again, going back to the basics, can create a mindset, and it literally grows your brain. So this is much better than, this is also, I was thinking about this is also why playing too much computer games or watching too much TV is not so good for us. It is good if you use it well, but if you do it too much, then it's overload. So that's just showing you that visual, such as mapping, drawing, it is good, but it takes up a lot, right? It's taking up your motor pathway, your visual, your thinking, even sometimes your auditory. So it's a lot. So that's why that's kind of like the flip side, because it just taxes a lot of your calories of your brain. So, but done right, good stimulation, it actually grows your gray matters, grows your neurons, and grows not only neurons, because neurons are harder to grow, but the connections around the neurons. That's now, of course, in the era now where we know all about how our brain is more plastic and epigenetics, that's even more important. Because whereas before we think once we age past certain age, our brains are, cells are dead and they don't come back. That's not true, because we're going to grow. Now, if you're 5 years, this is a new report, if you're 5 today, you're going to be 110 years old. That's how long you're going to live. If you're 5 years old today, you're going to live to be 110 on average. And so we're not even halfway there, right? So all this growing, again, is even more important, the brain cells and all that. So it's not just about figuring out your life and your where your organization's going, but it's also growing your brain cells for longevity and health. And this is just to show you how simple jotting down, sketching, mapping is important, because this is the Bailey Bridge. It's one of those bridges that was used in World War II, and it can be assembled without special tools. It can withstand the weight of tanks. Was done on the back of a envelope or napkin or something. So great ideas, simple sketches. Again, the MRI was also invented this way by a physicist called Paul Lauterbur. He also sketched the idea of an MRI on the back of a paper. Yeah. This is Aaron Sorkin's work. Again, his play. It was first a play and then a movie. was also sketched out on the back of the paper. So again, this is, I think I'm repeating, I have more, I tend to get really geeked out when it comes to neuroscience. But, so the importance of the visual to everything else. And so, and I repeated this even just in this gathering alone many times, is that most of our communication is in the nonverbal. So there are a couple of studies, 7%, 9%. So, and there are scientists that say, oh, it's not that simple because, learning and cognition is not just factorial. It's very complex. Yes, but at least we know that the predominant way we communicate is not through words. So again, we're going back to the multisensory part. These are all kind of the same. So again, another research that shows that 80 to 85% of our perception, learning, cognition, and activities are mediated through our vision. So that's kind of the other side. So I think that's it. Oh, and this is just to show, and I was talking to Ray G and even Mark about this. This is the study I was talking about, where this is to show you that so much of our sensory awareness is actually very low because of a lot of our sensory input we are not aware of, is what I'm saying. So if you think about our largest organ is our skin, so much is coming in, and then we're not processing it. If we process all, we'd be dead. It's too much stimulation. So this is a study done, and it was published on Science years back, done in Iowa, where they have subjects reach for cards, and they're supposed to accumulate points. Now, what they didn't know is that 2 of the decks of the cards are rigged, and they're called bad decks of cards. They're danger zones. These subjects are wearing a lot of sensors on their head, so to measure heart rate, breathing rate, and sweat level, such biometrics. And what the subjects didn't know is without their awareness, their body is already reacting after the 10th draw. When they reach the danger decks, their body's already reacting. Their heart's pumping, they're breathing faster, they're sweating, they don't even know it. Yeah. So a lot of things, what I'm saying is a lot of these mapping that we're doing, it's so comprehensive, and I would like to see one day where we actually put this under research, the territory mapping. But I would imagine that there's so much going on that is making sense to us intuitively, but we're not aware of it. And so, yeah, this is kind of showing you how the studies were done. This is another one, another fun one. This was done out of Colombia. What they did was shown subjects a lot of photos, images, and they're, usually happy, good, nice, good, positive photos. But in there, the designers have inserted a fraction of a second which show horrific, dangerous, or just, negative photos. After the experiment, you ask the subjects, oh, did you see this, da-da-da? No. They didn't. But again, they were wearing biometric sensors, but their body was already reacting. So for a fraction of a second, the heart rate and the sweat all came on, and the data was very clear. But if you ask them, they're not aware of it. They say, no, it was so good. There were babies and beautiful, men, women on the beach, none of that. They were all smiling. Yeah, so that's another. So 0.033 seconds were the duration of the image that was shown to them. Again, so to me, I think the reason why I was so drawn, because again, we were talking about this yesterday, art therapy, visual, all this, music therapy, multisensory, just makes so much sense. And when I saw Anthony and I tried the mapping, it just makes so much sense, and it's in line with the kind of the human cognitive architecture that we're investigating now. It just makes a lot of sense. And of course, yesterday we were saying that after we do the map, so what? Afterwards, what happens? I think the follow-throughs are going to be very important, they're going to be key. So because our brain as plastic as it is, and because it's plastic, because of epigenetics, we need to have follow-through steps and action afterwards, because the brain needs practice, the pathways to reprogram. So what that kind of the after work. That's it. Any questions or feedback or ads or?
Julia,